Hi there. Welcome to another edition of Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. I'm your guest host, James Latwell, and it's my privilege and my honor to bring to you today an author that I've come to know and really respect, and that's Tessa Wegert. Good morning, Tessa.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Jim. This is really exciting.
Oh, it should be fun. If you don't know Tessa, you're gonna really enjoy, I think, coming to know what she's about and what she writes and just about her in particular. But she's the author of the popular Shana Merchant crime novels, which include Death in the Family, The Dead Season, Dead Wind, The Kind to Kill, and the book we'll talk about today, The Devils at the Door. She's a former journalist. She grew up in Quebec and now lives with her husband and children in Connecticut, where she studies martial arts and is co-president of Sisters in Crime Connecticut. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction.
Yeah. Now you weren't only just the co-president. You helped found that chapter in Sisters in Crime in Connecticut, didn't you?
Yes, that is true. Yeah, that's been a really fun project over the last 2 years or so. A friend of mine, Elise Hart-Kipnis, who I actually didn't know until we both kind of raised our hands and said, "Oh, there's a need for a Connecticut chapter of Sisters in Crime. We are both based in Connecticut. We'll see what we can do to help get it off the ground." So, yeah, we've been in since the beginning. We got it, right off the ground floor. We have, I believe, 75 members at this
Oh
point. So
wow.
it continues to grow, and it's been a wonderful community to for both authors who are published and authors who are up and coming, even those who are just at the very beginning of their author journey of this kind of career, this kind of life. It's nice to have a broad variety of writers involved because we can mentor each other, and it's really just an opportunity to get together with people, like-minded people who all enjoy crime fiction in some form or another, and we meet in person and online, and it's been fantastic.
No, that's great. It is. It's a great support network and it really gets people kind of engaged in the writing community. It's a great thing.
Exactly.
But we're here today to talk about Devils at the Door, and I think it's the fifth in the there it is, a
It
fifth in the series.
It is. I'm very happy to talk about it because I am neck deep in writing the sixth in the series, which will be coming out later this year. I'm really right at the very end of it at this point, but it is kind of nice to take a step back from that process and think
Yeah.
about the previous book, and which came out in December, so it's still fairly new.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed it. I like the series. I enjoy Shayna. So for folks who don't know, tell us a little bit about your main character, Shayna Merchant.
Yeah, I would love to. So Shana Merchant is a former NYPD homicide detective. She has moved to the Thousand Islands in upstate New York, right on the border of Canada. She was involved in an abduction experience back in New York involving a serial killer that she had been hunting down. And having survived that, one of the only survivors of that serial killer, she moves to upstate New York with her fiance to settle down with what she hopes will be a quieter life in a quieter place. And of course, that's not how it turns out for her. Immediately, she is involved in several crimes. And so each of the books in the series immerses her in a new murder mystery. But they all also have this through line, this common thread involving the serial killer that pops back up in her life when she's come upstate. And so with Devils at the Door, she is now at this point a New York State police investigator. She's a senior investigator with the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. And it's a very small office, just a small little barracks up in Alexandria Bay, New York, which is a real place. And she and her partner Tim Wellington and the sheriff of Watertown and a couple of troopers and a variety of people in the area all investigate these crimes. So with Devils at the Door, at this point, a really kind of compelling secret about her life has come to light. People have learned that her family has blood ties to a pretty notorious character. And this information is out in the public realm now. And so Shayna's cousin back in Vermont is having to deal with the fallout of this news being public. So she moves to Alexandria Bay to spend the fall semester with Shayna and Tim and the group. And while she's there, Shayna is hoping that she can help her niece get her life back on track and help her really deal with, again, the fallout of this horrible news and the really she's getting a lot of negative reactions from the people in her life, and Shayna has been through this experience herself. So she's really hoping that she can help her niece get back on track, and instead she finds her niece at the scene of a suspicious drowning and realizes she may not know as much about this member of her family as she thought.
No, that was a very good summary of the book. Now, I found that Devils at the Door kind of marks a shift in the series a little bit, and I think you really nailed it because, as you mentioned, the books previous were really focused on that relationship between Shauna and Brom, the serial killer.
Yes. Yeah.
But you've really kind of pivoted now, and there's a little bit of through line there left with that in Devils at the Door, but she's kind of moving into a different direction now, isn't she?
She is, yeah, and that was a conscious decision that I made. I didn't, and I'll be careful here and not to reveal any spoilers, but I knew going into working on this series, and I didn't know at the beginning how many books there would ultimately be. So that was an interesting piece of it. Is from one book to the next, when I realized that there would be another, or when I got another contract for two, I did sit down to think about where I wanted to take her story and her character arc. But I didn't know right from the very first book how many books there would ultimately be. The one thing I did know was that I wanted to keep readers on their toes. I didn't want it to be a traditional cat and mouse game all the way through, the way that you might expect from a thriller or a mystery. I wanted to throw a few wrenches into the works to surprise people along the way. So yes, in some ways, he's very much still a part of her life and has been from that abduction experience that she had, which happens really off the page, but you learn about with the very first book, Death in the Family. But he's always a part of her life because he's a part of her past. And you learn that she does have a history with him and personal experiences with him that come out over the course of the series. You understand a lot and more about him and also his place in her life, and also a lot of guilt that she feels about the fact that they do have this personal relationship, and how she feels about victims of his that she oftentimes hoped that she could save or help and maybe didn't always manage to get there. So there is this really rich backstory, I think, to the series that readers find out a lot more about with every book. Now, that having been said, they do all work as standalones as well. I try to get people up to speed really quickly so that if they are new to the series, let's say with Devils at the Door, you'll understand what's going on. You won't necessarily have the depth of knowledge that you would have if you started at the beginning. But a lot of readers do tell me that they pick up, the third, fourth, fifth book in the series and do enjoy it and do manage to then go back and pick up the previous books and get right up to speed. And so that does happen often, where people will discover the series with the fourth or fifth book and then still go back. And so you're filling in a lot of blanks and getting a deeper experience that way, I think.
Yeah, and I think I found that with Devils at the Door. I mean, you could read this as a standalone, and still get that full story experience of the story that's going on in your book. So I think you've done a really good job making that, each one stand alone like that, so folks can just jump in at any point.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Now, the setting really plays a big part in your novels. That Thousand Islands area and just that small town feel. How did you come about choosing that area and that location for the setting in your book? Because it's almost like another character in the book.
Yeah, setting is a huge piece of what I think sets the series apart, and it's the thing that I begin with every new book. To be honest with you, when I sit down to write another book in the series, I always think about where I want to set it, which of the islands I'm going to focus on, or which the towns or aspects of the area I'm going to play up. And then I often think about the crime scene right off the bat too. How can I come up with a really interesting crime scene? And then that then informs the plot. So of course, there are other aspects involved. Like I do have to think of, at this point, with having, as mentioned, I'm working on the 6th in the series. So having all this backstory to work with, I do have to think about where Shayna is at this point in her life, where the people around her are, and what makes sense for her for next steps. But it's really all about the setting. And it is set in the Thousand Islands in upstate New York, which again is a real area. Most of the islands are all of the islands are based on real locations, but many of them have fictionalized names, just because if there's a crime that takes place, I want to, out of respect for those who live on those islands or in the area, I want to make sure there's just a little bit of distance in between,
Sure.
have some separation between fact and fiction. But I've been visiting that area for about 20 years now. My parents-in-law actually have a small cottage on one of those islands.
Mm.
There are more like 1,600 of them. There actually are far more than 1,000 in reality. But because I had this experience of having visited for so many years, when I decided to write a murder mystery, and that first one was Death in the Family, I knew right away that I wanted to set the story there. I didn't know at that point it would be a series, but I'm so glad that it is, because I've gotten to explore all of these other parts of the region that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So it's a really interesting spot, and a lot of people don't realize it's the freshwater boating capital of the world. It's a place that has a lot of very fascinating history, because it's the area that people from New York City and Philadelphia and Massachusetts, the kind of upper crust elite industrialists from the turn of the century, used to summer up there, before the days of air conditioning. So they would drive all the way north. They built these insane houses, just the most gorgeous. Some of them are actual veritable castles, and they still exist. So there's this fascinating history there. And at the same time, there are the locals who really cater to the tourists who come every summer. But in the off season, it's a very sleepy community. It's very quiet. And that's one of the things that makes it so interesting to me. So I've set some books during the summer months when the population triples with tourists, and some in the quiet season where it's a little bit sleepier. And so Shayna's now, that's her new home. She is experiencing all aspects of the seasons, and all different characters from this community that she has grown to love.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned it with like the off season, you're really dealing with that small town feel. So everybody knows everybody's business, and outsiders they stand out. They're not really trusted that much. And I think that makes a great dynamic to throw in the books with your characters. And speaking of characters, that's one of the things I think really makes your book stand out, is your characters. They feel like people, wherever you drop into the series, that feel like people that you've known for forever. And then you introduce these new folks in, like her niece, Henrietta, or Hen.
Right.
How did you go about creating that teenage angsty being that she is?
That's a fun question for me to answer, because the timing with this book was such that it made sense for me to revisit that character. I had mentioned her just in passing in a couple of the other books previously, but never really introduced her to the reader. But I saw an opportunity to work her into the plot of Devils at the Door. And I happen to have two teenagers of my own. So Henrietta is right in between their ages. And so when I realized the timing of the book was going to work out this way, and then when I started to plot and came up with this idea of having her come and live with Shayna for a semester, I looked at my own life and thought, well, what better time? Because I have experts right in under my own roof who can read some of my dialogue and let me know if it rings true, if it sounds like something a teenager would say. And my own kids, I am happy to report, are not nearly as angsty and emotionally tumultuous as Henrietta is, but they did give me a little bit of help when it came to shaping the character of both Henrietta and her a couple of her closest friends, but in particular Mia, one of her very good friends that she meets when she moves to Alexandria Bay.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's kind of fun that you had your daughters as kind of technical consultants on that piece of it.
Exactly.
That's great. So they didn't say, "Mom, why are you telling stories about my life?" or anything like that. They didn't give you any trouble.
Fortunately not. No, everything that I came up with in the end was fictionalized, but definitely the language, the dialogue, it was important to me to make sure that it did ring true to readers, that I didn't want it to sound like I was putting words in a teenager's mouth or anything like that.
Right.
And especially with this book, because the teenagers do play a very, very important role. And so once Henrietta arrives in the Thousand Islands, she starts to realize that the locals are very interested in her, particularly the other kids from her high school, because they
Right.
know a little bit now about her past. And so a few of them whose tastes maybe run a little bit dark want to know more about her and her life and her family's ties to a killer. So I did want the teenagers to play a really big role in this book. So it was important to me to get their voices right.
And I think you did a really good job with it. Having lived through that myself. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I have had a lot of readers say, "Oh, this sounds like my teenager. This is totally something my kid would say." So
Yeah,
I guess I'll
exactly.
take that as a compliment.
Now that you've kind of successfully reset the series and are pivoting in a different direction, what do you see where do you see Shayna going next?
Yeah, there are some really interesting changes afoot in her life. A pretty big transition that's happening for her that if you read Devils at the Door, you will discover at the end of that book. And I don't want to say what it is, but I will say that it plays a huge part in the sixth book in the series. So as she's kind of embarking on this new phase in her life, it's really changing the way she looks at her job and the risks that she takes in her daily work as a state police investigator. So that has been interesting. And I can say also about the sixth book that you learn a little bit more about the time she spent in New York. So there are some scenes that take the reader back to those very early days when she was still with the NYPD. The sixth book involves both a current murder on an island in the winter where a very small community of just 8 people live every winter. And the island is very difficult to access and can be completely inaccessible for weeks at a time. And there is a death that occurs on the island. And at the same time, aspects of that case that Shayna is currently working remind her of a cold case back in her days from her days in New York. So you get to hop back and forth a little bit. And I hope readers will enjoy discovering more about that part of her life, which, again, much of that happens off the page over the course of the series, because by the time the series starts, she's already living in the Thousand Islands. So there's a little glimpse back into what Shayna was like when she was living in New York City.
No, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
So, thinking back on the series, what's been your biggest challenge in writing the Shayna Merchant series?
I would say the biggest challenge is, and I'm sure this is true for every author of a series, I just really want to keep it compelling enough that readers will stick with Shayna. I really want to draw them back from one book to the next. And of course, that isn't always a prerequisite when you're reading a series. You don't necessarily have to read every book in the series, but it's been my goal from the beginning to add the hooks and twists that will encourage readers to continue to come back. But it is a challenge because I don't want to repeat myself. I don't want it to feel redundant. So every one of the books needs to contain a really fascinating self-contained mystery. But at the same time, I do want to work in like here's the example of Shayna's time back in New York. I do want to work in little Easter eggs for those who have stuck with the series all the way through as little rewards, I guess you could think of it as, for
Sure.
those who stuck with the series. So that's been a challenge, and it's also been a really fun experience for me because it keeps me really thinking about where she should be going as a character and where she's been and what more I can throw at her, but still in the, in the context of her world, how can I expand on her universe, this fictional world that I've created for her, while still helping readers discover something new about her at the same time.
No, that makes perfect sense. So we'll end up with what we're calling 3 quick hits. It's kind of helping readers kind of understand who Shayna is, and these are just 3 quick questions about Shayna.
Okay. Right.
What's Shayna's favorite music?
Oh gosh, Shayna's favorite music. I would say she likes alternative music. I actually created a couple of playlists for the books in the series recently on Spotify. So I did think a bit about what kind of music she listens to. So I would say alternative. She likes a lot of 90s stuff because that's the era in which she was a teenager.
Sure. No, it makes perfect sense. It fits. What is Shayna's favorite drink?
Shayna likes to drink gin. She likes gin and tonics. She will drink the occasional beer, but her drink of choice is definitely gin.
Got it. And finally, what is Shayna's biggest fear?
Oh, Shayna's biggest fear. She has quite a few. She has a lot of struggles with PTSD and anxiety that come out of the course of the series, but I would say her biggest fear is feeling inadequate and realizing that she hasn't done enough to help someone. She's very committed to helping the people in her community, and she's always pushing herself to do more.
No, I think that fits. That sounds like Shayna.
Those were great
So
questions.
thank you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about Devils at the Door. This has been great.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to chat with you, Jim.
Yeah, now we've been talking with Tessa Wegert, a fantastic author with a fantastic book. And if you haven't checked the series out, you really owe yourself a look. So take care, and we'll see you again on another session of Authors on the Air. Bye
Thank you
now.
so much.